Hey, welcome to this week's episode of The People's Report, News for the Left, brought to you by Solidarity TV. Today is January 28th, 2026. What is global water bankruptcy? And are we experiencing it right now? Who is responsible for holding up peace in Ukraine? What new food item is being recalled now? Do you think you deserve medical privacy? What about immigrants? Should the federal government summarily execute gun owners in the streets? What is Trump's Board of Peace? And what does it mean for Palestine? Should anyone have the authority to remotely shut off your car without your consent? Why does Trump think you are the biggest threat to America? What is surveillance pricing? And how is Google introducing it to e-commerce? All these topics and more in tonight's episode of The People's Report. Timestamps in the episode description.
Well, don't feel so devastated if you're feeling alienated, because it turns out you're not alone. Just open up your heart, let the revolution start, and grab that megaphone. Solidarity, solidarity, I need you and you need me. Solidarity, 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 solidarity.
World enters era of global water bankruptcy, January 20th, 2026, via UN News. The world has moved beyond a water crisis and into a state of global water bankruptcy, says a new flagship report released on Tuesday by UN researchers. For decades, scientists, policymakers, and the media warned of a global water crisis, implying temporary shock, followed by recovery. What is now emerging in many regions, however, is a persistent shortage whereby water systems can no longer realistically return to their historical baselines. For much of the world, normal is gone, said Kava Mandi, director of the UN University Institute for Water, Environment, and Health. This is not to kill hope, but to encourage action and an honest admission of failure today to protect and enable tomorrow, he told a press briefing in New York on Tuesday. Mr. Madani emphasized that the findings do not suggest worldwide failure, but there are enough bankrupt or near-bankrupt systems, interconnected through trade, migration, and geopolitical dependencies, that the global risk landscape has been fundamentally altered. The burdens fall disproportionately on smallholder farmers, indigenous peoples, low-income urban residents, and women and youth, while the benefits of overuse often accrued to more powerful actors. The report introduces water bankruptcy as a condition defined by both insolvency and irreversibility. Insolvency refers to withdrawing and polluting water beyond renewable inflows and safe depletion limits. Irreversibility refers to the damage to key parts of water-related natural capital, such as wetlands and lakes, that makes restoration of the system to its initial conditions infeasible. But all is not lost. Comparing water action to finance, Mr. Madani said that bankruptcy is not the end of action. It is the start of a structured recovery plan. You stop the bleeding, protect essential services, restructure unsustainable claims, and invest in rebuilding, he noted. The world is rapidly depleting its natural water savings accounts. According to the study, more than half the world's large lakes have declined since the early 1990s, while around 35% of natural wetlands have been lost since 1970, Mr. Madani said. The human toll is already significant. Nearly three-quarters of the world's population live in countries classified as water insecure or critically water insecure. Around 4 billion people experience a severe water scarcity for at least 1 month each year, while drought impacts an estimated $307 billion annually. If we continue to manage these failures as temporary crises with short-term fixes, we will only deepen the ecological damage and fuel social conflict, Mr. Madani warned. The report calls for a transition from crisis response to bankruptcy management, grounded in honesty about the irreversibility of losses, protection of remaining water resources, and policies that match hydrological reality rather than past norms. Water bankruptcy is such an interesting way of framing the water issue. I appreciate that, they want to expand past water crisis and really put us on the track of understanding that there's a huge problem that could be irreversible in a lot of ways. But calling it bankruptcy and the other financial terms that they use to address our water situation really interests me, because I feel like it is either directly targeting a specific type of audience, which of course would be big bankers and finance bros and other types of money movers who would more readily understand or relate to financial terms. Or maybe it's being written by those types of people, and thus their relationship with water is framed around business, which of course is kind of the source of the problem. the idea that water is a resource to be used rather than an essential part of an ecosystem that we belong to. It's another aspect of a traditional colonial and also capitalist mindset of the relationship to the land, and this time to the water, in which it exists to be owned and used. And we've seen, this kind of mindset before. Nestle, the CEO of Nestle, famously said the water is not a human right. The bottling and production of water that draws water resources away from communities, the industrial usage of water that takes it from the ecosystem, from the environment. Of course, right now, all the talk is about data centers, which guzzle water and drain local water tables, and, with immense downstream effects for the community. But, this has been going on for a little while. The Aral Sea has been almost entirely drained, starting unfortunately under the Soviet Union, but really rapidly escalating under the Russian Federation in the 90s, and then continuing to until today, where the Aral Sea is almost completely gone. And one of the effects of this is that the traditional fishing and coastal communities that lived there for as long as people have been living there are gone. That society is gone and is not going to be coming back. And it was used for cotton production, predominantly in the Russian Federation. Other examples would be Lake Mead and the Colorado River in the United States, which has been consistently dropping due to irrigation and other water-sucking production, but especially irrigation for commercial crops and agriculture in the United States. Wetlands are, being drained in order to create more land that could be used for housing markets or for industrial or for development. And all around, it's a really bad treatment of the earth and of the water table in general. I mean, fracking too, which poisons the water, and it's resulting in, we're on the verge of catastrophe. And like the article points out, most of the people who are going to be suffering from this are not, white Americans. They're going to be people of the global South, indigenous communities in North America, and North and South America, and honestly, indigenous communities all over. The colonial settlers are going to be able to buy and import water, and when water gets scarce in areas in which colonials and imperialists live, they're going to be able to, by force of arms, take that water from other people, which is already what's happening. I mean, this is how Nestle operates in Africa, for example, just straight up stealing water from communities that rely on it for their own corporate profits, backed by the muscle of the United States empire. And, understanding this disaster is the first step. And then, of course, fixing it is altogether another matter, but we can't fix it until we understand these root causes, which is the exploitation of the earth and the people at the hands of the capitalist class. And eradicating the capitalist class and returning the means of production and the resources themselves to the people to which they belong is important. This means decolonization. This means anti-imperialism and maybe in some places deindustrializing, or just changing the way that industrial operations work. We spend a lot of resources creating, worthless commodities that kind of only exist in order to be sold to generate profits rather than for its purpose in the world. But also just straight up returning or allowing things to return to nature. I'll give you an example. In the Czech Republic, I want to say a year, maybe 2 years ago, but very recently, there was a decision to return some land back into historic or traditional wetlands. And Czech Republic was building up the revenue to build these dams that would block the water in and fill it up. And the survey team went out the one time and they found out that native beavers had been doing it already. And not only were they already building the dams for free, but they were building them in the exact places that the researchers had determined had to be built in order to create these wetlands. So sometimes just allowing nature to take its course where it's supposed to and not hunting the beaver to extermination for their pelts and other such behaviors, letting your cats roam around outdoors to wreak havoc on the ecosystem, is all it takes to restore the land and free the land and bring it back to how it's supposed to be before we decided to destroy it for real estate interests or other, possessive ownership and exploitation of the land itself. Hey, if you're enjoying the show, consider supporting us at solidaritytelevision.org. Trump says Zelenskyy, not Putin, is holding up a Ukraine peace deal. January 14, 2026, via Huffington Post. U.S. President Donald Trump told Reuters that Ukraine, not Russia, is holding up a potential peace deal, rhetoric that stands in marked contrast to that of European allies, who have consistently argued Moscow has little interest in ending its war in Ukraine. In an exclusive interview in the Oval Office on Wednesday, Trump said Russian President Vladimir Putin is ready to wrap up his nearly 4-year-old invasion of Ukraine. Zelenskyy, the president said, was more reticent. "I think he's ready to make a deal," Trump said of the Russian president. "I think Ukraine is less ready to make a deal." Asked why U.S.-led negotiations had not yet resolved Europe's largest land conflict since World War II, Trump responded, "Zelenskyy." Trump's comments suggested renewed frustration with the Ukrainian leader. The two presidents have long had a volatile relationship, though their interactions seem to have improved over Trump's first year back in office. At times, Trump has been more willing to accept Putin's assurances at face value than the leaders of some U.S. allies, frustrating Kiev, European capitals, and U.S. lawmakers, including some Republicans. In December, Reuters reported that U.S. intelligence reports continued to warn that Putin had not abandoned his aims of capturing all of Ukraine and reclaiming parts of Europe that belonged to the former Soviet Empire. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard disputed that report at the time. After several fits and starts, U.S.-led negotiations have been centered in recent weeks on security guarantees for post-war Ukraine to ensure that Russia does not invade it again after a potential peace deal. In broad terms, U.S. negotiators have pushed Ukraine to abandon its eastern Donbas region as part of any accord with Russia. Ukrainian officials have been deeply involved in recent talks, which have been led on the U.S. side by Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law. Some European officials have cast doubt on the likelihood of Putin agreeing to some terms recently hashed out by Kiev, Washington, and European leaders. Trump told Reuters he was not aware of a potential upcoming trip to Moscow by Witkoff and Kushner, which Bloomberg reported earlier on Wednesday. Asked if he would meet Zelenskyy at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland next week, Trump said he would, but implied no plans were set. "I would if he's there," Trump said. "I'm going to be there." Asked why he believes Zelenskyy was holding back on negotiations, Trump did not elaborate, saying only, "I just think he's, having a hard time getting there." Zelenskyy has publicly ruled out any territorial concessions to Moscow, saying Kiev has no right under the country's constitution to give up any land. The part of this article that struck me the most, and you probably just saw it in my reaction to reading it out loud, is the description of the Soviet Empire. That's a complete fabrication. The idea of empires and imperialism is reliant on, capitalist exploitation and finance in ways that the Soviet Union never had the capacity to do because they never had the interest in building the structures and the systems in which to use finance capital to exploit and control imperial holdings. The myth of the Soviet Empire is a fabrication entirely designed to both obfuscate the actual role that the Soviet Union played in anti-imperialism and in order to create anti-Soviet and anti-communist and anti-socialist sentiment in the West, as well as to throw up a smokescreen of accusations for the U.S. empire to hide behind. every accusation is a confession, or whatever it is in lines, however it goes. And that is exactly the way that the United States operates, where it will blame others or condemn others for sins, perceived or otherwise, that it itself commits all the time. The United States is an empire. The United States has been a global empire for a century or more, and has been the global hegemon for almost a century. And the Soviet Union was never imperialist. And as much as one can discuss or criticize Soviet foreign intervention, that is not the same as imperialism. Imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism. Go read Lenin's book on the matter. When we talk about imperialism and we talk about empire, we're talking about something specific, not just vibes. And so that claiming the Soviet Union was an empire is bullshit. Just about as fictional as it is, the claim that Putin wants to rebuild the Soviet Empire or the Soviet Union or whatever. This has been a claim for a long time, especially after the invasion of Ukraine, in which the claim is, Putin wants to rebuild the Soviet Union. Putin's a communist. He's not. He's a capitalist. He's an oligarchical pig. He's the only difference between him and any U.S. president is sheer scale. Russia does not have the scale that the United States does, and thus Russia is not an empire. If anything, Putin is more inclined to support a reinstitution of the actual Russian Empire, back when it was an empire prior to the Bolshevik Revolution, and that is more in line with actual historical thought and not made up imaginary talking points to satisfy right-wing capitalists in the United States. Now, more on Russia and Ukraine. I don't. What more is there to say that someone else hasn't already said, both better and significantly worse? Russia is not invading Ukraine in order to rebuild the Russian Empire. Russia is invading Ukraine in order to provide security guarantees or to make security guarantees happen to keep NATO from being on its doorstep with arms and nuclear weapons. This is why they invaded Georgia in 2008. And this has been very, very clear for quite some time. Russia's been exceedingly clear on this. I'm not going to bring up the argument of, was Russia right to invade? That is a different question entirely, one that I'm not really interested in getting into because that's not the point. Because it doesn't matter whether or not they were right or wrong. They did it, and there is an invasion. And Western media is reporting that up to 1 million casualties have been taken by Russian forces compared to like the 300,000 Ukrainian casualties. I don't know. We'll see where the chips fall when this is all over. The point is that it has happened, and arguing whether or not they should have done it is a philosophical argument, not a material one. They did invade, and the reason why they invaded was in order to prevent NATO, the Nazi American terror organization, from encroaching on the country and invading and collapsing Russia the way that it has been designed deliberately to do, and any and all threats to the American empire. We saw what happened in Syria very recently with the complete ISIS takeover. We saw what happened in Libya. We saw what happened in Iraq. We saw what the United States has been trying to do in Iran. We see the constant siege on Cuba and on Venezuela and on the north of Korea. This is not an imaginary situation. This is not being dramatic. This is not just, America bad type stuff. This is legitimate material analysis here. And Russia is determined to keep NATO and the Western Empire, which of course is the U.S. empire, off its doorstep, which is why they invaded in the first place. So, the article trying to argue, Putin has no interest in anything other than completely taking Ukraine is false. The war in the Donbass is, we can talk about Russian interest in territorial expansion, if you will, by claiming the Donbass, although Russia has previously said they don't actually have interest in it. Their interest is in Ukraine being a non-NATO ally predominantly. And that is the guarantee that they've been asking for since the start of the war, and that Putin is hoping to get. We can also correctly address the neo-Nazi problem that Ukraine has, and their increased support for Banderites and for Bandera and the UPK and Nazism in general, which is sweeping the country, especially in the western side of the country. An interesting photograph from this past week is for, I believe it was on Holocaust Memorial Day, which of course was the Holocaust ended by the Red Army, saw Vladimir Putin putting a wreath on his brother's grave who died in World War II due to the Nazi siege. So the Nazis in Ukraine are a legitimate personal enemy to Vladimir Putin. I think that's worth pointing out whenever we discuss Putin and the Nazis and whatever, and how recent the Nazi problem has been to the world. His brother was killed by the Nazis. It's worth remembering. And, the United States is the successor to the Third Reich, and anyone reasonable would not want them anywhere near their country. Again, this is not to say that the Russian invasion of Ukraine was good, or that it was right, or that it's been worth it, or anything else. It's not to say it was wrong, that it wasn't worth it, that, no moral judgment is being given at the moment here. Simply to say that this is why it happened, and Western journalists and Western media and Western citizens need to wake up to the real material reasons that the Russia-Ukraine war has been going on for 4 years, and it is because the United States and their imperial occupation of Europe and their paramilitary called NATO, or not paramilitary, auxiliary military, their military arm in Europe that we call NATO, pushed for this war to happen, to bleed out Russia, to destroy Russian military capability, and they will do it to the last Ukrainian if possible, because they don't care about Ukraine whatsoever, except the natural resources that can be plundered from it, which the United States has already been trying to do, and it's been moderately successful so far, and the destruction of Russian military capability, because they don't care about the Ukrainian people, Ukrainian sovereignty, Ukrainian independence, any of the other stuff that they pretend to talk about. It is entirely because NATO kept pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing, knowing exactly what red lines to cross to provoke Russian retaliation or a Russian response. They did a test run in Georgia, found exactly what buttons they needed to press to get exactly the reactions that they wanted, and in order to, corner Russia, in order to create a situation in which the desired response, invasion, would be completely politically untenable and a legitimate risk to Russian sovereignty. So every time a Ukrainian person is killed on the battlefield or otherwise as a result of the invasion, one must understand that they were killed by NATO, forcing them and encouraging them to get engaged in a war that they probably can't win, designed to kill as many Ukrainians as it takes, expressly to increase American power in Europe and decrease Russian sovereignty and capability. Solidarity Television is an independent grassroots news organization. That means we rely exclusively on viewers like you. Support us at solidaritytelevision.org. Recall Genova Tuna, January 19, 2026, via FDA.gov. Tri-Union Seafoods is cautioning consumers that a third-party distributor inadvertently released quarantine product that was associated with the February 2025 recall. The initial voluntary recall was conducted following notification from our supplier that the easy open pull tab can lid on limited products had a manufacturing defect that may compromise the integrity of the product seal, especially over time, causing it to leak or worse, be contaminated with Clostridium botulinum, a potentially fatal form of food poisoning. This current recall was initiated after Tri-Union Seafoods discovered that quarantine cases associated with the initial recall were inadvertently shipped by a third-party distributor. The impacted products were distributed to limited retail stores as follows: Meijer in Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Michigan, Ohio, and Wisconsin; Giant Foods in Maryland and Virginia; Safeway in Albertsons, Vons, and Pavilions, California. Consumers should not use a product even if it does not look or smell spoiled. Consumers feeling unwell should seek immediate medical attention. If you have a recalled tuna can, please return it to the place of purchase for a full refund, throw it away, or contact Tri-Union Seafoods directly for a retrieval kit and coupon for replacement product. More info via the story link in the episode description. Oh, we got another food, I don't want to say crisis, food problem. Once again, courtesy of corporate negligence. The tuna producing company found out that the cans were defective through some means and recalled them and then put them into storage. I don't know why. I have no idea why they wouldn't destroy the product. I don't know if it was... I like to think this is just me making things up right now. I like to think that the plan was to be able to recycle the metal material and they just didn't get around to it. I don't know. I have no idea why they didn't destroy this product. But through negligence, it was shipped out to store shelves and could very well give a bunch of people botulism. So double check your tuna, of course. But it's another reason why we have to make sure that we are, holding both corporations accountable for the damage that they can do to the public through negligence and have a good, strong, healthy Food and Drug Administration. The United States just backed out of the World Health Organization, I think last week, for, the usual stupid Trump reasons. And the Make America Healthy Again campaign that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is on is a huge waste of time, money, resources, and energy of the American public. He's not actually interested in making America healthy. He's a conspiracy theorist and a nutcase. So, this is... And then, of course, cuts to, the FDA and to other government programs that are designed to keep people safe when they're eating and keep things like this from happening, are just more and more negligence on behalf of the government and specifically the Trump administration and the Republicans, who are convinced that less government oversight, less regulation is better for the people. The only ones it's better for is the corporations, who can do stuff like this and get away with it, or straight up not do tuna recalls later in the future if there's no one who's going to force them to do so. But, these companies need to be held accountable, and public health is important, and it does need to be prioritized. The safety and health of the people should always come before corporate profits. And people should be making sure that expired or unsafe or contaminated food that may contain botulism, isn't being shipped off to stores and being bought off the shelves by regular people like you and me, who could then go home and get sick and die, or feed it to their kids or their pets or anything else. It's just another case since Trump took office in which the food has been poisoned. And at the very least, this time it's not, seemingly not exactly negligence on the part of the food manufacturer. It was an errant distributor, they say, third-party distributor. So that's, I guess, nice, at least. But still, we should be seeing fewer of these cases, not more. I don't know if maybe I'm paying more attention to FDA-related stuff these days. Maybe this was already a common occurrence. I guess if it were, I wouldn't know because I wasn't seeing it in the news. but it certainly seems like it's increasing. But capitalists are always going to invest more in their bottom line and in their profits than in the people that make the world run. So we need to make sure that the people who make the world run are being taken care of. And that means safe, healthy food. Did you know the People's Report is produced for video and audio platforms? Stay informed by subscribing to us on YouTube or anywhere you listen to podcasts. ICE is using Medicaid data to find out where immigrants live, January 20th, 2026, via state line. In a win for President Donald Trump's immigration crackdown, a recent court ruling has cleared the way for U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement to resume using states' Medicaid data to find people who are in the country illegally. The case is ongoing, but for now, immigrants, including those who are in the country illegally, will have to weigh the benefits of gaining health coverage against the risk of that enrolling in Medicaid could make them or their family members easier for ICE to find. Last summer, 22 states and the District of Columbia sued the Trump administration to block information sharing between ICE and Medicaid, the state federal health insurance program that primarily covers people with low incomes. But at the end of December, a federal judge ruled that ICE can pull some basic Medicaid data to use in its deportation proceedings, including addresses, phone numbers, birth dates, and citizenship or immigration status. The court ruled that in the states that sued, ICE is not allowed to collect information about lawful permanent residents or citizens, nor records about sensitive health information. In the 28 states that didn't sue, however, the court did not place any limits on the Medicaid information ICE can access. By law, federal Medicaid money cannot be used to cover people who are in the country illegally, but in recent years, nearly half of states, including some led by Republicans, have chosen to use their own Medicaid money to extend coverage to certain groups of people, such as children and pregnant women, regardless of immigration status. Advocates for immigrants and some state officials worry that ICE's use of Medicaid data will cause widespread fear among immigrant families, keeping them from seeking the health care that states have said they're eligible to receive. California's health department recently called the administration's actions a grave breach of public trust. States have constantly reassured people that their health care information won't be used against them, and now that's changed, said Tanya Broder, Senior Counsel for Health and Economic Justice Policy at the National Immigration Law Center, an advocacy organization focused on immigrant rights. The expectation of privacy that we all have when we seek to enroll in a healthcare program has been compromised, said Broder. Data on Medicaid enrollees is routinely exchanged between states and the feds, including to verify eligibility to receive federal funding. But the new agreement marked an about-face from past federal policies of not using such information for immigration enforcement. The effort is unprecedented at the national level, said Mehta Makhlouf, a state professor at Penn State Dickinson Law who specialized in health and immigration. Previously, the federal government has balanced immigration enforcement interests with the protection of health-related interests, she said. Now they're weighing much more heavily the interests of immigration enforcement. That puts the federal government at odds with states that have expanded health coverage as a matter of public health and economic policy, she said. Many states have extended coverage to a wider swath of people on the premise that broader coverage helps prevent the spread of disease, prioritizes preventative care over more costly emergency treatment, and reduces economic losses when employees miss work because of illness. California Attorney General Rob Bonta, a Democrat, said in a July statement that the Trump administration's data-sharing move was illegal and created a culture of fear that will lead to fewer people seeking vital emergency medical care. For whatever reason, I've been having immense difficulty finding out what 22 states the court order applies to. I got a list of 20 of them here that I'll read to you from the Attorney General of Washington State. I don't know, unfortunately, it's missing. It's short too. I guess it came before two others signed on. But it'd be Washington State, of course, and then Arizona, California, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Hawaii, Illinois, Massachusetts, Maine, Maryland, Michigan, Minnesota, Nevada, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, Oregon, Rhode Island, and Vermont. Those are the 20 of the 22 states in which ICE or the federal government is prohibited from accessing most of your healthcare data. and can only access some of the limited data regarding so-called illegal immigrants. I can't scrape the rest of everyone else's data, but they can in every other state. And, well, I guess with two exceptions, which I haven't been able to find. It's absurd. I don't know how this isn't some violation of HIPAA. That being a protection, a right, basically your right to medical privacy. And the fact that, we don't have medical privacy in the United States anymore is absurd. What law enforcement needs to know or needs to have access to medical history? I guess maybe if you're already in prison and have a health concern or something, or I guess there are some things in which law enforcement might need to know medical history, like if you're carrying amphetamines on you for a health concern. I don't know, something like that. Are you high on oxy, or are you just carting it around for your chronic pain kind of thing? But we have here the official agreement, or the title of the official agreement here. It's the Information Exchange Agreement between the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services and the Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement for disclosure of identity and location information of aliens. CMS Information Exchange Agreement number 2025-80, effective date July 9, 2025, expiration date September 9, 2025. And that is the Information Exchange Agreement, basically allowing ICE, specifically ICE, DHS, but specifically ICE, to access your healthcare information in order to hunt down immigrants, so-called illegal or otherwise. God only knows who else are going to be going after with this data. We know that, the secret police, well, not so secret police, I guess, but the ICE, the law enforcement agency, accountable basically only to President Trump and his cronies, is, the first step towards a more thorough attack on civil liberties in the United States, which we'll get into a little bit more detail in 7 minutes. ICE and this, this law enforcement, again, so-called law, certainly enforcement, is not going to stay with just immigrants. And we know this because they're scraping everybody's medical information, building probably to help build their whole Palantir database they can then use later on with their elite program. If you guys are unfamiliar, go watch last week's episode. The totalitarian display being practiced by immigration and customs enforcement is just another step towards the grim totalitarian future of the United States, which many, many people, especially illegal immigrants, but also many Black and Indigenous Americans and other Hispanics and many other types of immigrants, have been living under for a long time anyway. That was trained and built on the genocide of the Palestinians, the ongoing genocide of the Palestinians. So, the fact that you can't have anything sacred or private anymore, even so much as your healthcare information, which if your doctor were to tell me anything about your health, that'd be a huge violation of HIPAA laws and of privacy, and you could sue, and they would probably get fired or, lose their license. But if they tell ICE, if they tell these thugs who go around the streets beating the shit out of people and murdering random citizens and disappearing people of color off American streets on the daily, that's permissible. And the fact that the government agencies are in direct compliance with this is preposterous. Although I do have to take a moment to give some praise to the states that have determined that, yeah, it's important to provide health care to people who are non-citizens and even people who are undocumented, because the public health is important, just like we talked about with the tuna. Public health is very important, and providing for public health and taking care of the public is critical. Like the article said, financial costs to the economy by workers calling out sick, is whatever, who cares? But, it is cheaper to provide preventative care rather than emergency care. And it's not just an economics type of thing where, we're worried about money. It's less wear and tear on an individual. It's less strain on the family. And it's less strain on public resources. Again, I hate talking about the care of people in monetary terms, but everyone, even in the most ideal system, where everyone is being taken care of altruistically, it's going to be easier to prevent disease than it is to treat it when it's a disaster. It's easier to recall tuna than it is to treat everybody with botulism. It's easier to pay the garbage man to take out your trash than it is to treat everybody who gets illness from trash laying around the streets all the time. It's easier to go to the dentist twice a year and get your teeth professionally cleaned and examined than it is to get your teeth drilled out and get dentures in. And again, it's less strain on the family. It's less strain on you, on your time. I'd rather spend 30 minutes at the dentist twice a year than be out of work or out of commission, we'll say, out of commission for a week because they had to take my teeth out or something. I don't know. I don't even know why dental is the example that comes to mind. And it's just better for the public. No one wants to see sick people running around, either because they're scared of being sick or because it just makes the community look and feel bad. We want to know that pregnant women are being taken care of. We want to know that children are being cared for. It makes us feel good because we are communal creatures that desire community, communal health, and we desire to feel good and look good for each other. And, abandoning people just because they're so-called illegal and letting them rot in squalor and be abused and, neglected and sick until we have to cart them away to a hospital sucks, and it makes everybody feel bad. And it's just there's no benefit to it. So props to those states. Even Republicans have noticed, and they're, taking care of illegal immigrants under special circumstances who need to be taken care of. So good for them. But, medical information should be private. Hey, if you like the People's Report, check out our other shows at solidaritytv.org. Minneapolis man killed by federal agents identified as ICU nurse Alex Pretti, January 24, 2026, via Huffington Post. The killing of the 37-year-old man sparked a surge of protests in a city already furious about the ICE killing of Renee Good. The man who was fatally shot Saturday morning by federal agents in Minneapolis has been identified as 37-year-old Alex Jeffrey Pretti. Pretti was an intensive care nurse, an outdoor enthusiast, and a dog lover, his parents told the Associated Press. A U.S. citizen, he was a Minneapolis resident and University of Minnesota graduate, the Minnesota Star Tribune reported, and worked in the ICU of a Department of Veterans Affairs hospital. His parents told the AP he had been participating in the recent protests against President Donald Trump's aggressive immigration enforcement that sprang up in Minneapolis in the wake of the killing of Renee Good by an ICE officer earlier this month. He thought it was terrible, kidnapping children, just grabbing people off the street, his father, Michael Pretti, told the AP. He cared about those people and he knew it was wrong, so he did participate in protests. Pretti was devoted to his Chattahoochee leopard dog, Jewel, before her recent death and took her on his many outdoor adventures, his parents told the AP, and was deeply bothered by the Trump administration's slashing of environmental protections. He was an outdoorsman, his mother, Susan Pretti, said. He took his dog everywhere he went, you know. He loved this country, but he hated what people were doing to it. Video taken Saturday morning showed at least 6 masked federal agents wrestling Pretti to the ground before fatally shooting him. A bystander video taken shortly before the incident shows an agent shoving Pretti as he backs up. The Department of Homeland Security has alleged that Pretti was armed with a handgun and violently resisted officers, with Border Patrol Commander-at-Large Greg Bovino saying that an agent fired defensive shots. Minneapolis Police Chief Brian O'Hara noted at a press conference that Pretti was a lawful gun owner with a permit to carry. Pretti's killing sparked a near-instant upswell of protest in a city where, just the day before, thousands of people marched in opposition to ICE. The death squads strike again and kill another random citizen in the streets over nothing. And no, how many people have to die before we do recognize them as death squads? I mean, 9 people so far this year that we know of have been killed by ICE. Now, the general public only has noticed the 2 white ones. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Honestly, media coverage has a lot to do with it. The fact that, most Americans didn't know about Campos being killed. We talked about him, I believe, last week. But, everyone saw all the video footage of Good and Pretti being killed. Has a lot to do with it. So I'm not just going to sweep every single American under the rug and say, well, you're all racist. You are. This country is designed for you to make you that way. But, 9 people have been killed by ICE so far this year. 2025 was the deadliest year for ICE. I'm sorry. Let me clarify. ICE killed more people in 2025 than in any other year prior since its inception in 2002. So they're just escalating. I saw a statistic that they're on track to kill 100 people this year. I don't know. I mean, it could stop at 9. Doubtful. But that's what they do. They are a violent, brutal, thuggish organization that goes around to terrify and terrorize communities. And they do so with impunity. And I don't know if it's the most shocking part about this, is the conservative response. And that within people who consider themselves to be part of the so-called gun community. Alex Pretti was killed by ICE agents after, I think they were CBP agents, federal agents, after being disarmed. And he was shot multiple times to death after being disarmed. He was lawfully carrying a concealed weapon that was a registered firearm that he was legally permitted to have, in a place where he was legally permitted to carry it, at a time which he's legally permitted to carry it, contrary to what FBI Director Kash Patel claims. You are, at least in the state of Minnesota, are allowed to carry a firearm at a protest. You are allowed to do so, or at least he was allowed to do so. Always look up your own laws. But in any case, even if he wasn't, we have to acknowledge that the crime of an unlawful carry is not a crime punishable by death, nor is it an active threat to the community. Carrying a gun in an area which you're not allowed to is not an active threat. And so the police or law enforcement or other people are not legally permitted to shoot you, because possessing a firearm is not a threat, an immediate threat in which lethal force is authorized or excused. So even if he was unlawfully carrying, which he wasn't, but they also disarmed him. So you probably all saw the video. They pepper sprayed him. They took him to the ground. An officer carried his gun away. They shot him, and then they started looking for his gun. They killed him. Obviously, of course, they killed him because they could, because him possessing a gun gave them the excuse to brutalize and murder an American citizen for the real crime of disrespecting them, of course. But the amount of bootlickers who are out there sucking up to ICE and saying, oh, well, you know, he deserved it, are one thing. We're always going to have those numbskulls who are like, oh, well, you know, the other guy died, glad to have it. We don't need these damn liberals anyway. Kill them all. Always going to have those guys. I honestly respect them a little bit more than the gymnastic chuds who are out there trying to find any kind of excuse to make this make sense to them. Oh, well, you know, he was illegally carrying, which he wasn't. Oh, they had to use their best judgment. They had to fight for their lives, blah, 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 blah. And the most ridiculous part to me is the people who are saying, oh, well, you know, he was carrying a military-grade firearm. Which, like, is, yeah, technically true, because the gun that he had, the P320, 6-hour P320, is also the U.S. military M17, whatever. Doesn't matter. It's a civilian firearm that you could go purchase at the store, but don't, because the P320 sucks. Don't buy that gun in particular. Just don't. And, you know, but theoretically, you could go just buy it at the store, and if you're legally allowed to conceal carry it, you can do so. You shouldn't for that one in particular, but you can. It's a civilian firearm that he was lawfully carrying. And, you know, it doesn't matter how many scary-looking attachments you have on it. An optic, a flashlight, extra magazines, etc., etc., etc. Scary army colors, because it was desert tan. They're like, oh my god, desert tan. Or whatever the official color brand is. I don't know. Coyote or something. Field Dark Earth, maybe, might be the official color designation. And, you know, the conservative chuds are getting themselves all up in a twist over this, as if carrying a firearm is an automatic display of intent to commit mass violence, which almost makes me feel like I'm living in a bizarro world if I didn't know that obviously these guys aren't saying it because they necessarily believe it, but because they need to score points and they need to convince themselves that goon squads running around murdering people on the streets is a good thing. Because I've heard the exact same rhetoric from liberals who are anti-gun. Oh, if you own an AR-15, it means you want to kill a lot of people. No one needs an automatic rifle that fires 15 bullets per trigger pull, or whatever, you know, they pretend the AR-15 stands for. And we've, you know, been complaining about the assault weapons ban that bans guns for having scary-looking attachments. Oh, if you have a flash hider, you blah, blah, blah. If you have a collapsing stock, if you have a pistol grip, you know, all of these things that make the gun look scary, and thus to the uneducated makes it seem more dangerous. And I'm not going to dunk on people who don't know gun stuff, because, like, I don't know, if it's not your world, why would you know much about it? Tons of people don't know how their car works, and they own them. So, you know, yeah, you look at a gun and it looks scary, and you assume it's more deadly than a gun that doesn't look as scary. But, you know, I don't know, gun people should know better. And having heard this kind of stuff from, not from the left, because liberals are certainly not the left, they're right-wingers for sure. Hearing this from liberals all the time, and seeing conservatives say it too, just when it's their guys who need the boost, is insane to me. But all that aside, the core of the fact is, much like how we've been seeing people get assaulted through the Trump and Biden, and now again the Trump administration, and the Obama administration, and Bush and Clinton, pretty much as long as there have been people protesting, the government's been brutalizing them for using their First Amendment. We now see that exercising your Second Amendment right is a death sentence, which means that your Second Amendment right might as well not exist. If legally carrying a firearm that you are lawfully permitted to have can get you executed on the street, then you do not have the right to bear arms. If the government, if federal agents can kill you simply for possessing a gun. Because he didn't draw the gun. At no point did the gun leave the holster until a federal agent took it off his body. Prior to him being shot, mind you. He was completely unarmed, and there was no gun on his person whatsoever when he was killed. If merely possessing a firearm is something that can get you murdered by federal agents, then possessing a firearm is not a right. It is a privilege that gets extended to whoever the federal government determines gets that privilege. And that means that whoever is currently on the side of the federal government gets the guns, and anyone who isn't on the side of the federal government gets the bullets. This week's book recommendation is Blood in My Eye by George Jackson. It's a collection of Marxist revolutionary political philosophy by a Black Power activist held in an American prison. Trump rolls out his Board of Peace at Davos, but many top U.S. allies aren't participating. January 22, 2026, via Huffington Post. In a speech at the World Economic Forum, Trump sought to create momentum for a project to map out the future of the war-torn Gaza Strip that has been overshadowed this week, first by his threats to seize Greenland, then by a dramatic retreat from that push. The event featured Ali Shah, the head of a new, future technocratic government in Gaza, announcing that the Rafah border crossing will open in both directions next week. That's after Israel said early in December it would open the crossing, which runs between Gaza and Egypt, but is yet to do so. Shah, an engineer and former Palestinian Authority official from Gaza, is overseeing the Palestinian committee set to govern the territory under U.S. supervision. The new peace board was initially envisioned as a small group of world leaders overseeing the ceasefire, but has morphed into something far more ambitious, and skepticism about its membership and mandate has led some countries, usually closest to Washington, to take a pass. Trump tried not to let those not participating ruin his unveiling party, saying 59 countries had signed onto the board, even though heads of state, top diplomats, and other officials from only 19 countries, plus the U.S., actually attended. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that some countries' leaders have indicated they plan to join, but still require approval from their parliaments, and the Trump administration has said it also gotten queries about membership from countries that hadn't been invited to participate yet. Big questions remain, however, about what the eventual board will look like. Russian President Vladimir Putin said his country is still consulting with Moscow's strategic partners before deciding to commit. The Russian president on Thursday is due to host Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas for talks in Moscow. Britain's Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper said her country wasn't signing on because this is about a legal treaty that raises much broader issues. Norway and Sweden have indicated they won't participate after France also said no. French officials stressed that while they support the Gaza peace plan, they are concerned the board could seek to replace the UN as the main venue for resolving conflicts. Canada, Ukraine, China, and the executive arm of the European Union also haven't committed. Trump calling off the steep tariffs he threatened over Greenland could ease some allies' reluctance, but the issue is still far from settled. The Kremlin said Thursday that Putin plans to discuss his proposal to send $1 billion to the Board of Peace and use it for humanitarian purposes during his talks with Abbas, but it noted that the use of those assets will require the U.S. action to unblock them. The idea for the Board of Peace was first laid out in Trump's 20-point Gaza ceasefire plan and even was endorsed by the UN Security Council. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced he's agreed to join after his office had earlier criticized the makeup of the board's committee tasked with overseeing Gaza. Months into the ceasefire, Gaza's more than 2 million Palestinians continue to suffer the humanitarian crisis unleashed by more than 2 years of war. And violence in Gaza, while not at the same level as before the October ceasefire and hostage deal was agreed on, continues. Key to the truce continuing to hold is the disarming of Hamas, something that the militant group that has controlled the Palestinian territory since 2007 has refused to do, and that Israel sees as non-negotiable. Trump on Thursday repeated his frequently mentioned warnings that the group will have to do so or face dire consequences. He also said the war in Gaza is really coming to an end, while conceding we have little fires that we'll put out. But they're little, and they had been giant, massive fires. This Board of Peace thing is incredibly stupid. Obviously, the real solution that the United States should be pushing for, and never would, is to give every single weapon that the United States military has and the full backing of the U.S. military-industrial complex to the Palestinians to forcibly dissolve Israel and create an actual Palestinian state with full sovereignty and, ideally socialist utopia. For every reason imaginable, the United States is never going to do that. That is the real solution to peace, not whatever Trump's bullshit is. But here are the countries who have, at the very least, signed the Charter for the Board of Peace in alphabetical order, courtesy of Wikipedia, so this could change. Argentina, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Bahrain, Bulgaria, El Salvador, Hungary, Indonesia, Jordan, Kazakhstan, Kosovo, Mongolia, Morocco, Pakistan, Paraguay, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, the United Arab Emirates, the United States, and Uzbekistan. And then countries that have said that they're going to join but haven't officially yet: Albania, Belarus, Cambodia, Egypt, Israel, Kuwait, and Vietnam. Which is probably, Vietnam's the most surprising one on here to me, except for maybe Armenia and Azerbaijan. Both. Maybe they're both looking to get something out of that Board of Peace. You got the racists, the slavers, the capitalists. You got the UAE and Saudi Arabia, and Israel, and the United States, and Azerbaijan. These are all, deeply evil societies. And then Vietnam. I don't know. I don't know why in particular Vietnam stands out to me so much. But I don't know. It's worth pointing out. If you notice, though, and let me double check just in case I missed it. If you noticed, conspicuously absent country by the name of Palestine. Not on there. Palestine's not part of the Board of Peace, even though they have this guy who's a former PA dude from the Palestinian Authority dude from Gaza. Palestine is not on there. Now, I don't know anything about this dude. I possibly by next week, my friends in Palestine will update me as to who he is. For all I know, maybe he was just chief garbage collector in Gaza back when the PA ran it. I don't know. But I have no idea who this guy is. He's got very little information. I looked him up. He's very little information about him outside of the Board of Peace discussion. Pretty much everything that the article said about him is what's publicly known, at least that I could find in relatively cursory English language websites and searching. He's former Palestinian Authority, which sucks. The Palestinian Authority is a band of compradors whose primary enemy is not Israel, but the Palestinian people who seek to gain national liberation for themselves and dissolve the colonial occupation. So the PA kind of sucks, and a lot of people in Palestine know that. There's a reason why they lost the 2006 elections in Gaza so badly. There's a reason why they refused to acknowledge the results of those elections. And, they're still in there trying to fight the lion's den in the West Bank rather than the settlers. And I understand it's the people in particularly the West Bank are in a very painful situation. And I understand how capitulation to the American empire seems like the least painful of the options. And honestly, I will let the Palestinian people take care of, my analysis, the compradors and the Palestinian Authority, rather than, my own spending too much time judging them. But it's important to note that the Palestinian Authority is the Palestinian puppet of Israel, which is in and of itself the right hand of the United States. So, setting it up with a Palestinian Authority guy in there suggests that, it's just the continuation of the ethnic cleansing and the genocide rather than an actual movement for peace. And the article itself takes some great strides to ignore the fact that Israel is the antagonist here. And I don't just mean that in the sense that Israel is the villain, which they absolutely are, unquestionably, but that Israel is the reason why Gaza is the way that it is. Gaza is like war-torn and besieged and beleaguered and all this other stuff. And all of it is framed as if the situation in Palestine, the situation in Gaza in particular, is, an act of God, as if it's just happened, instead of deliberate actions and choices by the so-called state of Israel, inflicting it upon the indigenous Palestinian population. And the demand that Hamas disarm is not going to happen, and it's ridiculous. They shouldn't have to, first of all. I mean, we just talked about how people don't necessarily, or should not be expected to just not have weapons, especially in the face of immense violent oppression. And Hamas is the legitimate leaders, not rulers, and not in control, the legitimate leaders of the Palestinian people and the Palestinian resistance. And they are not the sole resistors. In this case, there's an entire organization, well, maybe not organization, an entire coalition that they lead, not rule. And they have no reason to not be I hate saying in charge, after just making such a big point out of the fact that they don't rule. But there's no reason why they shouldn't be in governance if the Palestinian people want them there. The Palestinian people voted. They voted in Hamas because Hamas was the best option that they had. Hamas has done a pretty decent job of taking care of the Palestinian people and an amazing job of fighting the occupation, which has won them much endearment with a lot of the Palestinian people. And again, I'm not going to spend too much time criticizing any Palestinians who are opposed to Hamas for, whatever reason, whether it be, I don't like the state, or, wishing that, accepting the slow, painful crush of Israel as opposed to the rapid, brutal violence of war. Again, it's not my place to judge or to criticize. But Hamas is popular, Hamas is wanted, and Hamas is legitimate. The idea that just because they resist American imperialism and American exploitation and American colonialism does not mean that they are villains, that they are terrorists, they need to be gotten rid of. And the demand that they disarm is simply an excuse to continue and rapidly escalate the violence against the Palestinians with little resistance, just like we saw at the Shabra Shatila massacre in Lebanon when the PLO disarmed, and Israel and the Phalangists and Lebanese forces, which is not the Lebanese armed forces, that'd be Lebanese Christian far-right militias called the Lebanese forces. It's confusing, I know. Went on a killing spree and killed thousands of Palestinian people. This is what happens when Palestinians disarm. The Palestinians must stay armed and should not be expected to disarm, because political power grows out of the barrel of a gun. And without arms, they cannot create or defend their state, their sovereignty, or their people. Hey comrades, remember the words of Chairman Mao: civilize the mind and make savage the body. In order to outperform ICE, we first have to match their physical fitness standards. If it makes sense for you, start training to complete 32 sit-ups in 1 minute or less. Automotive kill switches could be closer to reality. January 23, 2026 via Yahoo. Automotive kill switches may have taken a quiet step closer to becoming part of the modern driving landscape, following a recent vote in the U.S. House of Representatives that rejected an effort to limit federal involvement in the technology. The vote took place during debate over H.R. 7148, the Consolidated Appropriations Act 2026, a massive spending bill that funds the Department of Transportation and several other federal agencies. While the bill itself does not require kill switches in consumer vehicles, lawmakers declined to adopt an amendment that would have restricted federal funding tied to systems capable of remotely disabling a vehicle. For critics of kill switches, that rejection was the headline. The amendment, introduced by Representative Thomas Massie of Kentucky, aimed to prevent federal dollars from being used to support or expand technology that would allow vehicles to be shut down remotely. The proposal was rooted in concerns over civil liberties, due process, and the long-term implications of giving governments or third parties the ability to control privately owned vehicles. Supporters of the amendment argued that once remote shutdown systems exist, their use could extend well beyond stolen vehicle recovery or emergency situations. They warned that such technology could eventually be tied to enforcement actions, compliance systems, or data-driven restrictions that drivers have little ability to challenge in real time. The House rejected the amendment by a vote of 268 to 164, leaving existing federal authority untouched. Although no kill switch mandate was approved, the vote signals that Congress is unwilling to draw clear limits around the technology. That matters as vehicles become increasingly software-driven, connected, and dependent on remote systems to function. Many modern cars already contain electronic immobilizers, over-the-air update capability, and constant connectivity. In some cases, automakers or third-party services can already limit a vehicle's functionality remotely. The concern raised by critics is not hypothetical hardware, but how existing systems could be expanded or repurposed with federal backing. Once a framework is in place, opponents argue, adding new layers of control becomes far easier than removing them. Cybersecurity experts have repeatedly warned that any system capable of remotely disabling a vehicle also represents a potential attack surface. A vulnerability in such a system could affect not just one car, but thousands at once. There's also the issue of mission creep. Technologies introduced for limited purposes often expand over time, especially when tied to enforcement, safety regulations, or digital compliance systems. Once normalized, opponents argue, the idea of a remotely controllable car becomes less controversial, until it is suddenly used in ways drivers never agreed to. As vehicles continue to shift from machines you own to platforms you access, the question isn't whether that technology exists, for it already does. The question is who ultimately decides when your car is allowed to run. Thomas Massie continues to prove himself as the probably only principled Republican in Congress. And as much as he is pretty dog shit, I appreciate that, I appreciate knowing that there are some, I don't want to say there are some people with principles, because a lot of his principles suck. But it's nice to know that there are still some people who stick to whatever, even misguided, I'll be generous, principles they have. Thomas Massie has been an ally of the Palestinian cause, at the very least when it comes to weapons funding and whatnot. And he is, but again, despite a lot of his horrible policies and opinions on pretty much everything else, he's once again right about this kill switch stuff. Just think about what this could mean for a moment. Your car having a remote accessed kill switch that could, at our most hopeful, shut the car off remotely from third party, whether it be government, law enforcement, or a corporation, at a whim without your input. What does this mean for you materially? Maybe it means that if you don't make a car payment, the company switches off your car and it can't run anymore. Maybe if if the law enforcement is after you, they can just switch off your car in the middle of the high-speed chase. One would hope that they would know better than to do that, but we all know law enforcement is all too happy to create mass violence and kill people in pursuit of whatever goals that they have, and are not above intentionally wrecking people's cars with them inside it. What else? Is it, what if you're a political opponent and they decide, well, you're just not going to drive anymore? Or, we can extend this a little bit further. Like they say, the creep. A subscription service to your car. They've already started playing with the idea of subscription-based amenities in your car. Heated seats for an additional $12.99 a month, or whatever. I don't know what the pricing is. It's already there. Your seats in the car that you own exist and can be heated, but you can't turn them on unless you pay rent. And the continuation of rent-seeking behavior in which they can just switch off your car. Like the article says, changing into a platform rather than a possession. And the more nefarious things. Again, law enforcement or the government using the ability to directly interfere with people's cars. I don't want to get conspiratorial because people are already like, oh, they can hijack your car and kill you, assassination style, and make it look like a car crash. Yeah, theoretically that is possible. I don't necessarily subscribe to the fact that to the claims that that's what's happening, but it's not off the table for something that could be possible in the future. Again, but the thing that scares me most is the subscription-based cars. That's called a bus to me personally, and I don't own the bus. I use it along with everybody else, and it's like $250. I would much prefer that than paying, $30,000 for a motor vehicle that I can't use unless I pay on top of it. It's ridiculous, and just more rent-seeking behavior from companies. And clearly, the government is not interested in stopping that from happening. Whether they want to be able to install it in the future, again, to target political dissidents or whatever else, or if they just don't think it's that important, I'm not really sure. I couldn't say. But I really, really, really dislike the implications. And I don't even like cars. I don't think most people should have cars. I don't think most people should be using cars. But, the remote, people do. People have them. And people are going to rely on them always. Hopefully not most people in the future, but, there are always going to be some people. And just the ability to remotely, for a third party to remotely control your possessions. You wouldn't allow that for your computer, your phone, your house. What if the company, your boss could purchase the rights to your thermostat, for example? I know that's kind of an extreme leap from this, but if they can license out cars rather than selling cars, what else are they going to do? And I really like the way that the article put it here, where they're shifting from machines you own to platforms you access, and who gets to ultimately decide, who runs your car? Is it going to be you? We're already seeing this with all sorts of other software. You don't own video games you buy anymore. You're leasing them from the company. And it's ridiculous. Not to mention the potential for outside intrusion. What if someone's like, yeah, I'm just going to shut down, for dramatic effect, I'm just going to shut down every single Ford in the country. Cyber attacks, cyber warfare and stuff that, the United States and other countries have been experimenting with and trying to develop. If American cars can have kill switches built into them, who else can access that? I don't want to fearmonger about China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, blah, 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 blah. But, it is not an impossibility that at some point, should this be part of our driving infrastructure, that other people could just decide, you're not driving today. It could be a hacker who's after you personally. It could be a what do they call them? We had an article a while ago about the cyber terrorists, I think they were called. Cyber terrorists, or just like shutting down people's cars. If you're driving down the highway 80 miles an hour, you probably shouldn't because there's no highway in America that's allowed to drive 80 miles an hour. If you're going 70 miles an hour down the turnpike and everyone's car just gets remotely shut off. It's a terrifying application of technology and of just more rent-seeking behavior from corporations and more surveillance and control, but that's possible from the federal government, which is a corrupt, imperialist, and fascist institution looking to exploit the worker as much as possible to create massive profits for corporations at your expense. There are highways that are 80 miles an hour. It's my mistake in Utah. Perhaps it is only in this area. So yeah, if you live in Utah or anywhere else where there is legally allowed to go 80 miles an hour, definitely do it. Do it for me, because I'm not allowed to. Hey, it'd mean a lot if you join our Patreon at solidaritytelevision.org. Leaf Doc, Homeland Security's Domestic Terror Obsession, January 21st, 2026, via Ken Klippenstein. Despite Donald Trump's fixation with Greenland and the suggestion that military action is imminent, the 2026 Homeland Threat Assessment focuses instead on domestic terrorism. The annual assessment, which has been prepared since 2020, purports to offer a holistic assessment to threats in the Western Hemisphere. These assessments have consistently focused on what you imagine: southern border security, the drug trade, immigration, and critical infrastructure protection in the United States. But this year's assessment, marked for official use only and not yet released to the public, identifies violent extremism on the part of American citizens as the priority and greatest threat. One phrase in particular stands out as new: potential terrorism based on class-based or economic grievances. The term has not appeared in any previous assessment. The reference first appears in the executive summary in a section summarizing public safety threats. Per the assessment, of threat actors with ideological motivations, domestic violent extremists in recent years have been the most active plotters. They are motivated to conduct attacks by a wide range of factors, including anti-government sentiment, racial and ethnic grievances, anti-Israel and anti-Semitic beliefs, and class-based or economic grievances. The threat from U.S.-based individuals inspired by foreign terrorist organizations has also risen to its highest level in 5 years, fanned by the ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict and in a resurgence in English-language terrorist media. The term again appears a second time in the full section on public safety threats. In recent years, domestic violent extremists have been the most active terrorist attackers and plotters, and we expect this will remain the case in 2026. They are motivated to conduct attacks by a wide range of factors, including anti-government sentiments, racial and ethnic grievances, anti-Israel and anti-Semitic beliefs, and class-based or economic grievances. The assessment doesn't define what it means by class-based or economic grievances. The phrase could as much refer to an angry MAGA Midwesterner as it could to any Mamdani-supporting urban dweller. But the focus is clear. The main threat to the homeland, DHS thinks, is the American people. In recent years, domestic violent extremists have been the most active terrorist attackers and plotters, and we expect this will remain the case in 2026, the assessment says. In contrast, foreign terrorist groups like ISIS are said to have a diminished capability. Further bolstering the government's new obsession with domestic terrorists, the assessment also says that foreign terrorists are attempting to cross the border at the lowest rate in decades. And when it comes to migrants, the number of encounters with foreign terrorists at the border are said to be at a historic low. As the Department of Homeland Security sees it, 2026 is a year when southern border immigration as an issue takes a backseat in the Trump administration's national security focus on North America and the Western Hemisphere. But what makes this still secret assessment really stand out is a certainty with which it states that the greatest area of considerable concern to us in the coming year is the threat of mass casualty attacks and targeted violence. From the World Cup to the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, Homeland Security is preparing for the threat. And that threat is you. First, just to reiterate, Hamas is not a terror organization. The United States and the U.S. empire considers Hamas to be a terrorist organization because they're ideologically driven individuals who resist occupation. and U.S. exploitation. That does not actually make them terrorists. Again, I will remind you that the same people who will tell you that Nelson Mandela was a terrorist will also tell you that Hamas are terrorists. And they'll also tell you that Osama bin Laden was a terrorist. And anyone who can't differentiate between Osama bin Laden and Nelson Mandela is probably not to be trusted when it comes to identifying terrorists at all. Just to point that out. And their allies in the Middle East, whether it be other Palestinian organizations, or Hezbollah, or Ansar Allah, or the IRGC, or the Iraqi group whose name escapes me at the moment. The Iraqi members of the Axis of Resistance, these guys are not terrorists. So the article doesn't claim them to be terrorists. The United States government does. Just to point that out, they're not terrorists. But the United States has determined, and again, this should be made public relatively soon. The U.S.-based individuals inspired by foreign terrorist organizations fanned by the ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict. Again, this is not terrorism. Resistance to the genocide of the Palestinians is not terrorism. To me, terrorism is very clearly bombing civilians with your warplanes in order to get them to leave a country or a territory that you want to colonize and occupy, and shooting 6-year-old girls 351 times, starving and bombing people, etc., etc. That's terrorism. Putting bombs into consumer electronics to detonate all over a foreign country, that's terrorism. Of course, I'm referring to Israel's pager plot. Whatever their beepers, creepers, or whatever their bullshit name for the terror project was, that the United States unilaterally and the media, from the conservative all the way to the liberal media, celebrated as being such a stroke of genius. But of course, if the Palestinians had done that to Israelis, it would have been the greatest crime since the Holocaust, what they would have said. But this is absurd. Anti-government sentiment. Okay, yeah, who doesn't have anti-government sentiments from time to time? Everybody does. Tax season is coming up. But I joke. I appreciate taxes theoretically. All the conservatives have anti-government sentiments, especially when Democrats in office. Anti-government sentiments, racial and ethnic grievances. Okay, that's probably a legitimate concern. And then anti-Israel beliefs. Anti-Semitic beliefs, again, we can talk about the reality of anti-Semitism if it exists as a material force in the United States. It doesn't. The government does not empower anti-Semitism. The argument of racism has structural power behind it, and the government is not racist against Jewish people. Anti-Semitism does not have actual material backing in the United States or in most places on Earth. Of course, there are racist and hateful individuals all over the country, but there are also same people against, like, Mormons, for example. Maybe they deserve it a little bit more than Jewish people. But there's always discrimination and hatred towards other religions and other ethnic groups. But we don't have, just so anti-Italian sentiment is no longer, anti-Italian racism is not alive and well in the United States. Same kind of thing as anti-Semitism. Anti-Israel sentiment, really, that's, they're going to say that that's a motivation or a threat vector for domestic violent extremists. Anti-Israel sentiment, of course, is and should be completely normal and the mainstream opinion of the general public of the world. And honestly, factoring in everybody in the world, it is. Most people in the world hate Israel because they're evil, an evil racist Nazi state. And the left hand, or the right hand, I think I said earlier, I don't know, it doesn't matter, right hand of the United States, so it is more part of the American Nazi Empire. And my favorite, class-based or economic grievances. Who doesn't have economic grievances? First of all, pardon my enthusiasm. Who doesn't have economic grievances at the moment? Who? Show me one American who isn't already a millionaire or a billionaire. And as we saw, I think it was last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, millionaires have economic grievances against the billionaires, which they should. Who doesn't have economic grievances? Not to mention that, like, the economic grievances of the billionaire class is, you know, the fundamental aspect of class war and the exploitation of the proletariat and the global masses, and especially the global South, is, you know, the economic grievances of the ruling class. So it's just everybody in the United States who is a normal individual has economic grievances. If you have to decide between the store brand and the name brand cereal, you got economic grievances. If you look at the gas price and think, damn, you got economic grievances. If you pay for anything or don't pay for things because you can't afford it, you got economic grievances. Obviously, you know, people shouldn't be paying out the nose for, like, trinkets or whatever, treatlerism and all that. Different conversation. But everyone has economic grievances. So the fact that the economic grievances are an indication of ideological motivation for domestic violent extremists is insane. You know what? If you don't want people to have economic grievances, empower the working class. It's that simple. And class-based grievances. Obviously, what this means is this is targeting specifically left-wing individuals, especially socialists, communists, because the ruling class has class-based grievances. They have well, I don't know if it's a grievance against the working class, but they obviously grievance in action where they exploit and abuse the working class. So the idea that, you know, there is class-based grievance is a indication of domestic violent extremism is very clearly designed to punish, target, and harass people who have class consciousness, people who understand the way that the world works, people who understand the ruling class and the working class, the owning class and the working class, people who understand actual class differentials. It's not talking about people who are like, oh, well, I'm middle class and I hate the upper class, and it's certainly not talking about upper class people who hate poor people. Certainly, they're not going to say, well, the biggest threat to domestic violent extremists in America is the landlords who send bulldozers out to murder homeless people. That's a class-based grievance, class-based violence and class-based terror. But of course, when it's our bodies on the streets, no one cares, or the ruling class certainly doesn't care. But as soon as the ruling class starts feeling the heat, well, you know, now it's domestic violent extremism and we have to be destroyed. So class consciousness makes you a terrorist now, I guess. I don't know. This is so stupid. But you know, the takeaway here should not just be that it's stupid or that it can be all-encompassing and account for almost anybody who's anti-government or who has views that the government doesn't want. Because of course, you know, this is what all of this ICE bullshit is building to, is eventually having our own true Gestapo who will just go around and just grab and attack random people off the street for not aligning with what the ruling class wants. You know, if you're some libertarian who's like, I don't want to pay taxes, and I think everyone should be allowed to do whatever they want, and I think you should, you know, what's the classic thing that they like to say? I think gay people should be able to defend their weed farms with guns and not pay taxes on it or whatever. Well, guess what, buddy? You and I are both going to the concentration camps. You know, the right winger who's like, I want to have my cattle graze on federal land without paying for it, and is just as anti-government and has class-based grievances as someone who says, I think we need to destroy all landlords. They'll come for you eventually as if you stand up against what they want and don't immediately bend over. And that's what they're building to. So that should be the takeaway here, is that A, they're specifically starting to target people with left-wing ideology and a class-based analysis and understanding of the world, people who actually understand the relationship between labor and capital, but also that they are making such broad sweeping broad sweeping structures that could encompass anyone that they need to. We're already seeing random people get killed on the streets for the crime of being a lawful gun owner. So, they'll come after anybody that they want, and if the working class doesn't stand up to them and doesn't stop that from happening, it's going to happen. Another way you can support us is by following us on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Google's AI knows what you'll pay. January 20th, 2026 via Lever News. Last week, Google made 3 important announcements. The first is that its AI product Gemini will be able to read your Gmail and access all the data that Google has about you on YouTube, Google Photos, and Search. The second announcement is that Google has cut a deal with Apple to power that company's Siri and foundational models with Gemini, extending its generative AI into the most important mobile ecosystems in the world. The third announcement is that Google will launch a new Gemini-powered ad service, an open protocol to create personalized surveillance pricing for merchants across the economy. Taken together, these 3 announcements imply a revolution in how our economy works. And Wall Street has noticed, with Google hitting a $4 trillion valuation. Right now, Google's revenue stream comes from advertising via its search monopoly. Search queries are cheap, and the ads Google sells are pricey due to its market power, so it's a very profitable business. Gemini, by contrast, is expensive to operate and generates no revenue. Even if Google were able to shift all of its search advertising revenue to Gemini, it would be moving from an extremely high-margin business to a lower-margin one. So what's actually going on? The answer, as it turns out, is that Google may be seeking to become our central planner and price setter. In the documentation for Universal Commerce Protocol, Google lists dynamic pricing as a key tool for merchants. Google is also creating a pilot of something called direct offers. Rather than just buying advertising, businesses will pay to allow Google to set prices when it makes recommendations to users through Gemini. There are several reasons to see why what Google is doing is ominous. Pricing expert Lindsay Owens, who helped uncover the dynamic pricing scheme of Instacart, noted that this pricing engine could be a way of having Google help retailers analyze user data and then use it to overcharge consumers. There are other areas for concern. There's no technical reason that Google itself has to be the centralized agent. Presumably, consumers could allow other generative AI models to analyze their data and become assistants. Just as Google's search monopoly was not inevitable, neither is the Gemini takeover of pricing. What is ominous about Gemini is that for its monetization of Gemini to work, Google may have to eliminate market signals and democracy itself. And it has its marketing agents working on that point. For instance, Daniel Crane, an antitrust law professor and Google lawyer, wrote a 2024 article titled Antitrust After the Coming Wave, in which he discussed how antitrust law could not survive the inherent need to monopolize markets due to the characteristics of generative AI. He argued that we should forget about promoting competition or costs, and instead enact a new Soviet-style regime, one in which the government would merely direct a monopolist's AI to maximize social welfare and allocate the surplus created among different stakeholders of the firm. Where one sees a Google agent making this case for this sort of centralized power, one should take note. There are legal proposals to address the problem. Representative Ruben Gallego of Arizona, for instance, a possible presidential candidate, have proposed legislation that would ban personalized surveillance pricing. Second, even fellow oligarchs are afraid of Google. Here's Elon Musk responding to the Apple announcement. This seems like an unreasonable concentration for power for Google, given that they also have Android and Chrome. Finally, and most importantly, the public is angry about concentrated economic and political power. They do not like arbitrary and opaque pricing, and they will not tolerate a monopolist's ability to wield it without limits. That is, of course, if we remain a democratic society. I wish the Google actually were interested in operating a Soviet-style regime in the United States, because then we'd finally have dignity. We'd finally have care. We'd finally have empowered women. We'd finally, be able to actually pursue things like what the United States stands for, freedom and equality. But, when they say, and this article says, Soviet-style system, I think regime is the exact word that they use, Soviet regime. Yeah, Soviet-style regime. What they mean, of course, is some kind of central totalitarian dictatorship thing, blah, 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 rather than the dictatorship of the proletariat. The Soviet Union had its problems, and it didn't live up to what it wanted to, but unlike the United States, it actually legitimately tried. And again, I'll point to the classic, you've probably seen it, but the classic differentials between Soviet advertising regarding women and or propaganda regarding women and American propaganda regarding women from the same time period. It's sickening. The United States is disgusting, especially in the way that it treats women. That's largely off topic, though. The article is fear-mongering and create and already spreading capitalist propaganda about Soviet Union and about socialism, and calling it regime. No one ever calls it the United States regime. Some people will call it, in criticism of Trump, the Trump regime. But the American regime, whatever. I digress. This, however, this surveillance pricing is absurd. And it's already enacted. You can already, I think airplanes and hotels do this a lot, from what I understand. I don't book either of those because I'm poor. But, if you go shopping for a hotel, the price will go up in the areas that you're looking for, because they'll try to sell you based on what you'd be willing to pay, because you're obviously not going to stay on the street. If you're trying to fly to Orlando or whatever, the more you look for it, the higher the prices are going to climb in order to get you to pay more, to create more profits. And I feel like this is exactly why they're putting in digital price tags in stores, by the way, so that way they can eventually do surge pricing on consumer goods at the store. If you stand too long in one spot, I don't know, if too many people shop in one section, they raise the prices. I don't know if that's actually true. It probably is. But I do know that stores like Amazon already do this. If too many people are shopping for a good, they'll raise the prices on it in order to reap more profits. Even if the company that manufactures the product isn't interested in doing that, Amazon's going to reap the rewards. So it's only a matter of time before Walmart does the same thing with its physical stores. It already does it in its online shopping. And so the fact that they'll just outsource this proceeding to an AI company in order to just automatically adjust the prices of goods online is not looking good. The full article describes what this could look like with shoes, as one of the examples. If Google is able to set the prices, they can set the prices for all the different stores, and either set the prices more competitively for stores that pay more to Google than ones that don't, because they've already done this. They've like dropped competitors down in listings and whatever. But if you're going to pay more for advertising, you might pay more for them to reduce your prices. So that way more people are going to shop at your store rather than a competitor's store, etc., etc. And it's all to manipulate public buying and to extract as much as possible. Now, the Google guys say, it's going to be for discounts. If you're shopping for, we'll still use shoes. Let's say you're shopping for shoes, and you're like, these are expensive, I'm not going to buy them. The Google AI might be able to determine that, and will theoretically offer you a lower price, and will be authorized to offer you a lower price on goods in order to get you to buy it. But we know that, and as the full article details, we all know that some of these discounts just aren't real. We see this in stores all the time, especially in Black Friday now with TVs, where a TV will be $150 in August, And then by November, it'll be $300, and they'll drop it. Oh my God, 50% off for $150, Black Friday special. It's like, but there's no sale. Palmetto State Armory does this all the time. A bunch of different stores and storefronts will pretend that will value an item higher than they're actually selling it for to trick the consumer into thinking that they're getting a deal on the product. So, if Google is offering 20% discounts on stuff to get you to buy it, who's to say that they're not just going to jack up the prices and then offer you a discount in order to get you to buy it? And who's to say that they won't jack up prices all across the board and then only offer you discounts on suppliers that pay more into Google? It's all just manipulative. Or who's to say that they won't just determine, yeah, you know what? We bought stock in this shoe company, so we're going to drive up prices to create profits. I don't know. But that kind of price gouging and price manipulation, price fixing is, I'm pretty sure price fixing is straight up illegal, and it's a legitimate cause for concern. Surge pricing is a huge scam. And of course, they always excuse it through like supply and demand, as if those are legitimate market forces that create value. They don't. Read Marx. We all know that's not really how economics works. But it sounds cool and it sounds right to the layman who doesn't know any better. So, if they can just adjust the prices at whim using an AI program that is reading all of your emails, looking through all your photos, using your calendar, learning everything it can about you to create a perfect buyer profile in order to market to you better. It's just, the targeted ads, but more malicious and more exploitative and more intrusive. It's kind of gross. I really don't like it. The only hope is that AI sucks so bad. They call it, if Amelia Bedelia was a computer. So, I don't know, maybe for a brief window, we'll be able to trick Google AI into thinking that no one will buy shoes unless they're 20 cents, and we'll just, I don't know, get everything we need real cheap before they figure it out, and hopefully screw a bunch of companies out of the profits that they took from stealing from the workers and exploiting the customers and just robbing everybody blind. I don't know, maybe we'll get a chance to rob them back because AI sucks so bad and it's such a bad product and doesn't make any money and it is stupid and dumb. I don't know. Again, it's the Amelia Bedelia machine. So, with any luck, this will turn out in our favor, but, the oligarchs behind AI and AI programs are not going to make it work out in our favor because they don't work for us. They don't work at all. They exploit us. And not to mention the fact that all this is going to be powered through AI data centers, which are just going to suck water and power and land from all the communities and just create a really toxic hum in the air in your neighborhood, and then you turn on the tap and there's no water and your power is going to go out all the time. And all this other stuff that happens when they build data centers in your community to prioritize short-term profits and speculation in the AI market rather than the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness of the general public. And of course, all powered by materials that they robbed from the global south and used the force of arms and used, what do they call it, the poverty draft to get more soldiers to go enforce that, which they're going to create more poor people by sucking up all of our resources to build more data centers, and just this bullshit imperialist circle jerk used to extract us for all that we're worth until the revolution, and then we win. I don't know. Hey, thanks for joining us for this week's episode of The People's Report. Don't forget to subscribe at solidaritytelevision.org. Organizing the working classes of the world in solidarity forever.